Good morning, class. I hope you all had a great weekend, are excited and ready to learn this week. We're going to be starting off our week by talking about three processes: weathering, erosion, and deposition. Our three processes can be seen here, and I want you to follow along in your notes and write down the definitions and key points about each process. The first one we're going to talk about is weathering. Now, weathering is any chemical or mechanical process by which rocks are exposed to weather and undergo changes and break down. Now, this would make sense if you think about when you're carrying a heavy load of books or you're doing an activity which causes a lot of physical exertion. After a while, you tend to get tired and your body starts wanting to rest. This is kind of like what rocks do. Due to external forces that can be seen in wind, rain, and sometimes sleet, snow, or even ice. After a while, the strain and the pressure caused by these external forces causes the rocks and sediments to just break down and undergo changes. Now, after weathering occurs and the rocks have broken down from their original form, a process called erosion will take place. Now, erosion is the process by which soil and rocks are removed from the Earth's surface and transported elsewhere, as we can see here in this definition. Now, you can see I underlined the word transported. Sometimes erosion and weathering are confused to be the same thing, but they're not the same. In erosion, it's taking down the broken down sediment and it's taking it somewhere else. It's moving it from where it was broken down due to weathering and it's taking it someplace else. The sediment and the rocks are transported usually by wind or water flow. If you've ever gone to the beach, or if you're not from the coast like I am and you've been to the desert, you can see the tiny grains of sand are a result of weathering, broken down rocks. And you can see the wind carrying the grains of sand across the horizon or the shoreline. And also water flow. If you've ever looked at a river, sometimes it's pushing little pebbles down the stream, or it's pushing them in a different direction and they're not standing the same. This is erosion, where it's taking something from its original home and taking it someplace else. Now, after you've had weathering, where elements such as rain, wind, and ice have broken down the rocks and erosion has taken them elsewhere, it's got to go someplace new. It has to find a new home. And this brings us to our third and final process, deposition. Now, after soil and rock have been transformed, the soil and rock are added to a landform or mass when the transported sediment loses its kinetic energy and the mass begins to build up. During erosion, the rocks are moving. The rocks are in kinetic energy because they're moving. But after a while, they tend to lose their energy and they tend to slow down. And this is where deposition comes in. As these rocks and sediments slow down, they build up and they start creating a new landform. Kind of if you think about like when you go to the bank, you're taking your money and you're putting it someplace new. This is a lot like deposition. You're taking it from one home and putting it to a new home. Now, all of these processes seem like they'd be their own thing, but if you look at them closely, they all work together. When you start with weathering and you look at how the different elements, the rain, the wind, and the ice, they break down the rocks, they wear it down, and then the erosion picks up the weathered rocks and sediment and takes it somewhere new in a deposition that stores it up and builds a new land mass. All of these processes work together and form a cycle, because after it's been deposited somewhere else and a new land mass is formed, after time, the whole process will begin again as the elements, rain, wind, and ice, will pick it back up and break down the newly deposited land mass. Now, be sure to fill in your notes, class, before we meet and talk about weathering, erosion, and deposition, and we'll have a super fun activity.